Hey guys! Tonight we descend into a world where knowledge was power, and power lived in a stone box colder than your ex's heart. You're standing at the edge of a medieval monastery, cloaked in mist and the distant chime of a bell that doesn't care about your sleep schedule. The door creaks open, not because someone's inviting you, but because you're about to get drafted into the quietest, coldest job of your life, librarian. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle across uneven flagstones, robes clinging to your shins from the damp air. It's morning technically, but there's no sun. Just a blue-grey hue bleeding through tiny windows no larger than a loaf of bread. The scriptorium, that's the fancy name for the room where books are copied, is on the far side of the abbey, past the chapel, down 2 flights of draughty stairs, behind a thick wooden door that swells shut in the rain. And it's always raining. Inside, the first thing that hits you isn't the cold, it's the silence. A silence so complete that even your own breath feels intrusive. Then comes the cold, so sharp it hums in your teeth. Your toes already hurt. Your fingers, well, you can still see them, but not for long. Here, beneath stone-vaulted ceilings, illuminated only by narrow slits in the wall and a few flickering oil lamps, you'll spend hours hunched over a slab of wood pretending to be a desk. And this is not just any chill. It's the kind that seeps into your bones and convinces you that maybe heaven isn't as warm as the priest promised. Most monasteries didn't have heating in these workrooms. Fires were dangerous, and books, handmade, precious, flammable, were kindling, just waiting to go up. A single spark could erase the labour of decades. So, no fireplace for you. Maybe a brazier in the hallway, if you're lucky. But the scriptorium? It's essentially a well-dressed fridge full of angry monks with carpal tunnel. Historians still argue whether this chill was intentional to keep monks alert and humble, or just a byproduct of poor insulation and medieval building materials. Either way, you're not cosy. And here's the real kicker. You can't even pace to stay warm. This is a sacred space, governed by strict monastic rules. You move only when told. You talk only if it's absolutely necessary, and preferably in Latin, which you kind of speak. Kind of. Like how a modern tourist kind of speaks French after downloading Duolingo. The desk is barely wide enough for your codex and ink, and someone before you has carved a doodle into the corner, a little pig, oddly well rendered. Maybe it's a cry for help. Or dinner. You sit on a low stool, splintered and uneven. There is no cushion. Your robe offers zero insulation. The draught from the window slit knifes down your neck as you light a candle stub, already shaking. The flame flutters like it's unsure whether to die or hang in there with you. Books, at this time, were not books the way we know them. They were massive, sometimes as large as a microwave, bound in wooden boards and sheathed in leather, often chained to the desk to prevent theft. These chains weren't dainty either. They were thick enough to anchor a small boat. You lift one just to see how heavy it is and immediately regret it. Your wrist cracks audibly. Still, there's a kind of reverence in this space. You can feel it. The labour, the silence, the sheer weight of human effort stuffed into every page. No one's talking, but you know everyone is tired, and cold and low-key mad about it. You glance at your neighbour, Brother Odo, who's already scribbling in tight, perfect script. He has exactly one eyebrow. The other burned off last year when his lamp exploded. He never replaced it, just kept copying psalms like nothing happened. Respect. You open your own volume. Today it's Augustine. You'll be transcribing a section on sin. Again. You already copied this last month, but the last copy was ruined when Brother Cedric sneezed ink all over the parchment. He tried to blame a ghost. You all pretended to believe him, because frankly, it was easier than arguing. You dip your quill in the ink. It's cold. Not just cold, sludgy, like molasses left on a windowsill in January. You breathe on it gently, trying to coax it back into something usable. It resists. Out in the hallway, a bell tolls. It's time to chant. You sigh, set down your pen and join the slow procession of shivering monks toward the chapel. Your knees crack with every step. You don't feel your ears anymore. But hey, it's a break from the scriptorium. Even if the chapel's only slightly less frigid. And as you walk, you start thinking, maybe this is all part of it. The cold, the silence, the physical hardship. It's supposed to strip away comfort, to leave nothing between you and the sacred work. It's not just about copying books. It's about becoming a vessel for them, whether you like it or not. Still, it wouldn't kill them to install a fireplace. You trudge back from chapel with frost still clinging to your eyebrows and a hymn stuck halfway in your throat. The scriptorium looms ahead again, your silent jail of paper and pain. As you step inside, you instinctively duck under the low arch of the doorway. Brother Anselm didn't once, and he hasn't remembered his Latin declension since. Your fingers are just regaining sensation, which is unfortunate timing, because now it's time to wrestle with the chains. No, not the metaphorical chains of duty, actual, honest-to-God iron chains that keep the books leashed to the desks like angry guard dogs. You shuffle back to your bench, where your assigned volume sits bolted to the desk by a chain thicker than your wrist. This isn't an exaggeration. Most medieval libraries used a system called chained libraries to keep their precious volumes from wandering off. Books were so valuable, sometimes worth more than a house, that losing one was unthinkable. You pull the chain gently, and it clinks ominously across the desk. The book barely shifts. You try again. Still not enough give. You shuffle your stool 2 inches left. Still not quite. Okay, there. You can now open the book almost all the way, which is great, because the passage you're copying today is in the far corner of the left-hand page. This is when you realize the absurdity of the design. The books were chained by the spine, facing outward, with the chains bolted into metal brackets. That meant flipping through them was a two-handed, muscle-recruiting ordeal. Try turning a heavy vellum page, while also not pulling so hard the chain jerks the whole book back shut. It's like arm wrestling a sleepy dragon. And forget about spreading out 2 books for reference. That's a luxury from the distant, sparkling future. Here, you get 1 book, 1 bench, and 1 angry librarian with a stick ready to remind you not to be wasteful with movement. Historians still debate whether the chained library system was primarily about security or control. Were monks really worried about thieves, or was it more about regulating who got access to what? After all, most people couldn't read, certainly not in Latin, and the few who could weren't often trusted to just stroll into the library unsupervised. You glance up and notice Brother Matthew struggling at the far end of the room. His book has a chain that's snagged under the desk, and he's trying to untangle it without making noise. He's sweating, not from heat, obviously, but from sheer effort. You send him a look of quiet solidarity. He nods, then promptly knocks his inkwell over. A low moan escapes him like the last breath of a dying goat. The librarian at the front desk, Brother Eustace, who may or may not be a statue depending on the light, snaps his eyes open. One look from him, and Brother Matthew starts mopping ink with his sleeve. You pretend not to see. It's safer that way. Even the noise of the chains clinking can get you reprimanded. The ideal scribe is silent, still, and somehow superhumanly coordinated. You, tragically, are none of these things. The chains weren't standardized either. Some were so short you had to hunch sideways to read the bottom of the page. Others were long enough to get caught around your stool, ankles, or the neck of an unlucky passerby. It's surprising there weren't more fatal strangulation incidents. Then again, maybe there were. Medieval record-keeping didn't exactly prioritize librarian casualties. There's also the constant scraping sound, chains dragging over wood, over stone, over your patience. It never fully goes away. It's like tinnitus for the soul. That, combined with the endless rustling of parchment and the occasional suppressed sneeze, becomes the soundtrack of your waking life. You dream of these chains. Sometimes they chase you through the monastery halls. Sometimes they wrap around your hands mid-sentence and pull you backward into the cold stone walls. You wake up gasping, only to realise, oh wait, you fell asleep at your desk again. Brother Eustace is watching. Again. You return to your work. Your quill scratches softly on the page, each letter a miniature battle against the stiffness in your fingers. You're not just copying text, you're replicating sacred geometry, carefully measured and aligned letter by letter, line by line. The margins must be exact. The kerning, though you don't have that word yet, must be perfect. Even one smudge of ink can ruin a whole folio. And then, you start over, from the beginning. You shift to reach the next paragraph and the chain tugs again, reminding you, you are not free. Neither is the book. Knowledge here is literally chained down. It does not travel. It does not spread easily. It is protected, but also hoarded. You pause for a moment and glance at the barred windows. Beyond them lies the forest. It's not that you want to run away and join a band of outlaws living in the woods, illuminating text by moonlight and drinking mead from acorn cups. But it's not off the table. Back in the scriptorium, Brother Matthew has given up. He's just holding his face in his hands. You consider doing the same, but the bell hasn't rung yet. You still have an hour of copying left, an hour of dragging that iron leash across the desk every time your tired eyes shift focus. And so, with a sigh that fogs your lamp's chimney, you dip your quill again. You resume copying. The letters dance, the chain tugs, the cold bites, and somewhere deep in the shadows behind you, Brother Eustace still doesn't blink. You flex your hand, trying to fight off the creeping numbness that sets in after a few hours of writing, and glance toward your ink pot. It's congealed again. Of course it is. Because your ink, like nearly everything else in your medieval librarian life, is made out of stuff that shouldn't work, but somehow does. Ink in the scriptorium isn't store-bought, because stores don't exist yet, and if you want something like smooth black liquid, you basically have to crush the woods and boil the sky. Your ink is a strange little potion, part ground-up oak galls, part iron salts, part vinegar, and sometimes, if the monk mixing it was feeling extra experimental, wine, soot, or, let's just say, organic matter. The oak galls, for one, are tiny parasitic lumps that grow on trees when wasps lay eggs inside leaves. Yes, you're writing the words of God with bug homes. Isn't that charming? You take a knife and stir the ink slowly, trying to reliquify it. This was common. Iron gall ink tends to thicken when cold, and since your breath currently looks like a chimney puff, your ink has the texture of jam made from sadness. And vinegar. Historians still argue about who perfected the formula first. The Romans were dabbling with it, and the Arabs improved it. But by the High Middle Ages, every monastery had their own recipe, sometimes passed down more fiercely than actual scripture. The ink is acidic, by the way. Not at first, but over time it eats into the parchment, turning fine lines into etched scars. This means that, centuries later, archivists will curse your name as they try to preserve your beautiful calligraphy that is actively dissolving the document it's written on. You scrape the top crust off the ink and dip your quill. Not too deep, you don't want a blot. Too shallow, and it dries before it hits the page. It's a balancing act, like everything else in this job. The smell hits you next. Sharp, vinegary, slightly metallic. It's like writing in a vinegar factory run by forest gnomes. You barely notice it now, but when visitors come, they wrinkle their noses and ask, "What is that?" You just smile politely and point to the bugs. They never ask again. And then there's the colour. You call it black, but it's more of a dark brown or purple black that ages unpredictably. Sometimes it turns orange, sometimes green. Occasionally it disappears entirely. This means you spend entire days recreating ink that will one day erase itself, like a sad medieval Snapchat. As if that weren't enough, ink isn't your only chemical dance partner. For red ink, you might be using cinnabar, which is basically powdered mercury and super poisonous. Vermilion is bright and beautiful, but it'll shorten your lifespan if you handle it barehanded too often. Not that anyone told you that. You'll probably find out later when your teeth fall out for no reason. For gold accents, you mix ground gold leaf with egg whites or honey to make it stick. Illuminators, those poor guys, have to breathe on the gold gently to warm it just enough to press it in place. One ill-timed sneeze, and the whole thing blows away like glitter at a 6-year-old's birthday party. You've heard rumours of a monastery in Italy where they use squid ink. Another one in Ireland mixed ash and beer to create a kind of grey wash for shading. And let's not even talk about the one place where the monks allegedly used crocodile dung as part of the binding glue. That one might be apocryphal, but medieval monks did experiment with all sorts of bizarre additives. You wouldn't be shocked to find a recipe calling for 3 drops of goat's eye water under a waxing moon. You pause to blow gently on the page, just enough to dry the ink, not enough to spread it. The lamp beside you sputters. You forgot to trim the wick again. The flame jumps, then calms. It casts a slow-moving shadow across the half-written lines, giving the illusion that the letters are dancing. And in a way, they are, because every letter you copy is alive. You don't just write words, you sculpt them. Each one must conform to a shape, a script that's been drilled into your hands by repetition. Gothic script, Carolingian minuscule, or the dreaded insular script with its squiggly unpredictability. These aren't just fonts, they're entire worlds of rules. You once tried to freestyle, just a little. Rounded a letter more smoothly than usual. Brother Eustace appeared behind you within seconds, like he'd been summoned by a ritual of ink and disappointment. He didn't even speak, just tapped your desk 3 times. You never rounded another G again. And when your ink finally runs low, you don't just refill it. Oh no, you fetch Brother Gregor, the apothecary scribe, who prepares a new batch with the solemnity of a funeral rite. It takes hours. He won't let you watch because last time someone peeked, they fainted at the smell. To this day, nobody's sure what was in that batch. The book still smells faintly like cheese. You hear a sharp sound. Brother Matthew again. He spilled his ink a second time. The chain on his book yanked too hard. He has that look now, the one scribes get before they request an assignment to the stable just to feel something different. You give him a sympathetic nod and return to your own page. You dip your quill once more. The ink is a little smoother now. It glides easier. You start writing again. Careful, deliberate. You don't think about the ingredients anymore. Not the bugs, not the vinegar, not the iron. You just focus on the sound of the quill on parchment, the tick of the candle flame, and the quiet breath of cold air through the window slit. You are a medieval librarian. You are cold. You are tired. But at least your ink is cooperating. For now. You blink a few times, trying to bring your focus back to the line you were on. It's no use. Your fingers are stiff, your ink is drying mid-stroke, and your spine has decided to start auditioning for most crooked column in Christendom. Every single page you copy is a battle against both the parchment and your own anatomy. You clench your jaw, stretch your hand subtly under the table so Brother Eustace won't hiss at you, and roll your shoulders with all the grace of a rusted hinge. You're 4 hours in now, maybe 5. Hard to say. The little sliver of daylight through the slit window has barely moved. Time in the scriptorium isn't measured in hours, it's measured in paragraphs. You finished 2, not pages. Paragraphs. That's because copying a manuscript in this era isn't like taking notes in a class. It's a ritual. Every curve of every letter must match the standard script exactly. Your M can't look too much like an N, or someone 100 years from now might accidentally declare a theological heresy. There are real stakes here. So you go slowly, painfully slowly. Your hand cramps with each downstroke. The parchment, a treated animal skin that still smells faintly of barnyard, isn't smooth like paper. It's thick, irregular, and often contains scars, freckles, or leftover hairs from whatever unfortunate sheep it used to be. Historians still debate just how many animals went into a single Bible manuscript, but estimates range from 100 to 300 individual skins, which means you, right now, are petting history very, very slowly. Your quill, too, isn't doing you any favours. It's a goose feather, trimmed to a narrow point with a tiny knife called a penknife. That's right. Penknife isn't just a charming word. It's your only lifeline when the tip of your quill frays, which it does every few lines, so you sharpen it again and again and again. And there's a small pile of quill shavings under your bench, like the sad confetti of a party no one wanted to attend. Every time you slice, you risk ruining the angle and having to start with a new feather. Feathers that had to be plucked, dried, cured in hot sand, then stored for months before use. Oh, and don't forget, they only work from the left wing of the bird if you're right-handed. That's a thing. You briefly wonder if the goose knew where its feather would end up. Probably not. Then again, maybe this is some kind of posthumous revenge, a daily reminder that your wrist is forever held hostage by avian spite. And then there's the parchment. You can't just press your pen like you would on paper. No, parchment demands pressure and grace. Too much pressure, and the quill snags. Too little, and the ink doesn't absorb. Some sheets were treated with lime and pumice to smooth them, but inconsistently, which means 1 inch might be buttery and the next as rough as a monk's bath towel. You have to adapt with every letter. You press, you adjust, you press again. You wince as a sharp pain snakes up your forearm. You try to stretch. Your back screams, your neck crunches, and still you copy. 1, letter, address A. Time. You know what would help? A cushion, but you don't get one. Sitting on wood is part of the discipline. Softness is for sinners. The hours wear on. You start seeing phantom letters. Did you already write this line? You check. You did. Kind of. But 1 word is missing a letter. You groan quietly. That means you have to scrape it off. Yes. Scrape. Mistakes can't be crossed out. You use a tiny knife to gently scrape the ink off the parchment surface, then rub the spot with breadcrumbs or bone dust to smooth it down again. If you're lucky, you don't slice through. If you're unlucky, you just ruin 2 days of work. You glance down the row. Brother Jerome is asleep sitting up, his pen still clutched like a weapon. Brother Anselm is rubbing his temples and muttering prayers under his breath. You're not sure if they're real prayers or just pleas to St. Carpal of Tunnel. Then you see Brother Matthew. Again. He's massaging his hand and blowing on his fingers, trying to get some circulation going. He's moved on from ink spills to early arthritis. And yet, the manuscript in front of you is beautiful, even in this draft stage. You've drawn margins with a straight edge and tiny holes poked along the sides to guide your lines. The columns are perfect. The illuminated initials await gold leaf. There's something magic here, underneath the suffering. Historians still wonder whether these monks truly viewed their work as divine devotion, or if, like many of you, they just couldn't get out of it. The truth is probably both. There's holiness in the labour, even if your spine strongly disagrees. You take a moment to admire a previous page. Your letters are sharp, your spacing solid, your ink even. You feel a flicker of pride, immediately swallowed by the dull ache pulsing from the base of your neck. You mutter a short prayer to Saint Isidore, patron saint of scribes, then a second one to Saint Apollonia, patron of dental pain, just in case your jaw decides to join the rebellion. Outside, a raven croaks. A sign? Maybe. Or just another reminder that even birds are warmer than you. Still, you press on, 1 page closer to completion, 1 step closer to a manuscript that might outlive you by 1,000 years. That is, if your hand doesn't fall off first. You wake up, not from sleep exactly, more like from a trance. Your hand is still moving, still forming careful loops and lines. But your brain had checked out 10 minutes ago and was dreaming of hot soup or possibly dying in a fire just to get warm. The bell tolls faintly outside. Prime? Terse. You've stopped keeping track. The bells come, the bells go. What matters is that now it's time to leave your desk and head to the chapel for another round of chanting. Not food, not rest. Chanting. You rise slowly, trying not to grunt, because Brother Eustace considers vocalized discomfort a form of vanity. Your knees disagree with him loudly. Outside the scriptorium, the hallway is even colder. You walk with the other monks in silence, your breath fogging the air like you're all characters in a very slow, very depressing opera. Every so often, someone coughs, always discreetly, and the entire column of robed figures flinches like a single organism. You file into the chapel. It's dimly lit, smelling of wax and centuries of sighs. You take your spot in the choir stalls. No pews here, just long wooden benches with unforgiving backs. You stand, sit, kneel in rhythm with the prayers, which are in Latin and somehow always just beyond your comprehension, no matter how long you've been here. The morning prayers begin, sung in a droning unison meant to lift the soul, or at least prevent anyone from falling asleep. The acoustics are gorgeous. The cold is spiritual. Historians still argue whether the extreme regimentation of monastic life was primarily spiritual or logistical. Certainly the prayers were considered essential. But were they meant to centre the mind? Or simply fill the day so completely that no one had time to rebel? You're not sure. Right now, your only rebellion is quietly shifting your weight from foot to foot, trying to keep blood in your toes. Back in the dormitory, you're assigned a straw mattress that crunches every time you breathe. It's better than the floor, but not by much. And in winter, forget it. You sleep in your robe, sometimes with your hood pulled so tight around your head, you look like a terrified, monk-shaped egg. There is no central heating, of course. Fires are rare and strictly controlled. Most monks sleep shoulder to shoulder for warmth. Not out of affection, just survival. You once tried to hug Brother Matthew in your sleep, and woke up to a stern lecture about chastity of the elbow. You eat in silence. Meals are simple. Bread, a ladle of something brothy, and maybe cheese if you're lucky. Meat is rare and generally frowned upon, unless you're sick. Everyone's sick, but not meat sick. You'd think the food would at least warm you up, but no. It's barely warm when served and cold within minutes. You chew slowly, not because you want to, but because fast chewing is considered unrefined. That's a real thing. You return to your bench after the meal. The scriptorium waits. Your page from earlier still glows faintly in the lamplight. You glance at the upper margin. You drew a tiny doodle there yesterday. A rabbit with a scroll. No one's noticed. Yet. The cold hasn't left. It never leaves. It seeps into the walls, into your bones, into your sense of time. You wrap your robe tighter. One of the older monks wears fingerless gloves. You envy him with the white-hot jealousy of someone who's been frostbitten twice. There's a story going around that one scriptorium in the Alps had a fire installed in a hidden grate beneath the floor, heated the stones just enough to keep ink from freezing. Of course, they were condemned by the bishop for decadence. That tracks. You sigh and flex your fingers again. Your left hand is losing feeling. You swap the quill to your right hand for a minute. It's useless, but it helps the circulation. Sort of. You dip the quill. The ink's thickened again. You whisper a prayer to St. Drogo, the patron saint of coffee, even though coffee hasn't reached Europe yet. You believe in miracles. You keep writing. Another line. Another loop. Another perfectly spaced word about penance or paradise or punishment. In the quiet, you start to drift again. Not asleep, but somewhere between memory and dream. You remember being a novitiate, the first time you saw the scriptorium. How holy it seemed. How clean and orderly and bright. You didn't notice the icicles forming inside the windows. You didn't know yet that the warm glow was just an illusion from beeswax candles. You didn't realize that once you entered this life, your days would blur into hours of cramped silence and aching fingers and so much cold. You thought it would feel like heaven. You didn't expect it to feel like being preserved alive. Still, the work is good. The manuscript in front of you is more than a book. It's a memory container, a time capsule. It holds prayers, laws, songs, warnings, recipes, dreams. You are adding to the invisible library of humankind, one cramped syllable at a time. You blink again, shake your head, and scratch out the word you just misspelled. Brother Eustace stirs. The floor creaks. Someone sneezes. The oil lamp sputters. And outside, beyond the frosted window, the day drags on. Back at your desk again, because you're always at your desk, you glance up and notice the shadows have shifted ever so slightly across the stone floor. That's the only real sign that time has passed. The sun doesn't pour into the scriptorium. It sneaks. It tiptoes. It sometimes forgets to show up altogether. You squint down at your parchment, but the letters blur. You blink. Still blurry. Ah, yes, it's time to battle your oldest enemy, light, or rather, the complete absence of it. The scriptorium is lit by narrow windows set so deep into the wall they might as well be whispering good luck to anyone trying to see what they're doing. In winter, or even on a cloudy day, which is every day, the light barely makes it past the window ledges. So, you rely on lamps, but not bright, friendly modern lamps. Number these are oil lamps or smoky rushlights. They flicker like they're being haunted and burn like a dying idea, dim and moody. They cast just enough light to remind you that you can't see clearly. Sometimes you're assigned a beeswax candle, a real luxury. It smells nice, burns steadily, and drips like a warm medieval lava lamp. But even that has to be used sparingly, and under the beadle's watchful eye. Historians still argue whether these low-light conditions were designed to conserve materials or simply a product of poor architecture. Some claim it was meant to protect the manuscripts. Too much light can fade ink, but others think monks just didn't prioritize ergonomics. You lean closer, but that doesn't help. It just means the flame from your oil lamp now dances annoyingly across the edge of your vision. You tilt your head. No good. You briefly consider setting the whole page on fire and calling it divine judgment. Instead, you lift the page slightly to catch a better angle of light. The chain on the book pulls taut again, reminding you that not even your eyesight is free. There's a theory, one that isn't proven, but feels true, that many monks gradually went blind because of this lifestyle. Between the strain, the poor lighting, the toxic ink pigments, and the cold making their eyes water constantly, it's a miracle any of them made it past Psalm 23 with their vision intact. Brother Anselm, 3 desks down, is the cautionary tale. He's now on light duty, which mostly consists of counting parchment sheets and pretending he can still see the difference between an O and a smudge. He hasn't admitted it, but you can tell. And you? You're getting there. The text on your page swims a little. The ink glints strangely. You're developing what could generously be called medieval librarian squint, a look of perpetual skepticism caused entirely by low candle power. You blink again. Your lamp sputters. The oil's low. Of course it is. You quietly stand and tiptoe to the side table where a small flask of oil is kept. You open it with trembling fingers and pour gently. 1 drop too many and the flame flares dangerously. 1 drop too little and it goes out altogether. You whisper encouragement to the lamp like it's a fussy child. It flares, calms, settles. You exhale. Returning to your bench, you notice how much worse the shadows have become. The sun is nearly gone for the day, and soon even this dim greyness will be gone. That's when the real horror begins. night writing, because lamps at night are even dimmer, and the chill intensifies. You write more slowly, more cautiously. Every letter feels like carving words into mist. And don't even think about asking for extra light. That's a luxury reserved for illuminated manuscripts, and you, poor scribe, are just copying sermons about sin and redemption. No gilded angels for you. Brother Matthew lights his own lamp. It hisses, then coughs smoke into his face. He sneezes. Loudly. Everyone freezes. Brother Eustace's head turns 90 degrees without moving the rest of his body. A monk trait, like owl magic. He stares at Brother Matthew, who shrinks like a rat under a hawk's gaze. No one speaks. The silence becomes so loud you can hear the parchment drying. After a beat, Brother Eustace returns to his post. No words. Just judgment. Silent, endless judgment. You return to your writing. You've adapted. You write by instinct now, letting the curves of the letters guide your hand, even when your eyes can't quite follow. It's weird, isn't it? You're transcribing knowledge that's meant to illuminate minds, but you're doing it in near total darkness. There's a metaphor in there somewhere, but you're too tired to find it. You blink. Again. The page is done. Finally, you look it over. No smudges, no missing lines, no blots. The letters shimmer slightly where the ink's still drying. You allow yourself a tiny smile. Then you realize you've just been assigned another page. Because of course you have. You pick up your knife, trim your quill, and squint at the blank space. It stretches before you like an ice-covered lake. One word at a time, you remind yourself, even in the dark. There's a faint scratching behind the wall. You freeze. Not from fear. Nothing scares you anymore except running out of parchment. But from that special brand of dread reserved for people who know exactly what that noise means. Mice. Again. You sigh quietly and glance around. You're not alone in noticing it. Brother Jerome stiffens. Brother Matthew glowers in the direction of the sound. And Brother Eustace remains motionless. But you swear his left eyelid just twitched. Mice in the library are not a surprise. They are a certainty, like taxes, frostbite, or Brother Anselm's digestive complaints. But today, the scratching is persistent. Eager. Possibly organized. You resume writing, pretending to ignore it. But now you're hyper-aware. Every sound could be tiny feet scampering across sacred pages. Every shadow under the desk could be whiskers and teeth aiming for your margins. Because mice love books. And not in the noble, I just want to learn Latin way. No, they love books the way toddlers love cardboard. Chewable, nestable, and deeply satisfying to ruin. Your manuscripts are made from animal skin, sewn with animal sinew, and sometimes even written with fish glue or egg-based paints. To a mouse, that's a buffet with footnotes. You once found a chewed corner in a psalter and were made to recopy the whole page. Brother Eustace said, "God's word deserves better than mouse bites," which is poetic, but doesn't help your wrist. Historians still debate how widespread rodent damage was in medieval libraries. Some suggest it was minimal due to the cold and the lack of food crumbs. Others believe many manuscripts were simply lost to the gnawing jaws of time and mice. You're firmly in the second camp, mainly because you've seen it. And the traps? Well, monks weren't big on killing, so traps often consisted of little cages baited with old cheese. Once caught, the mouse would be carried outside and encouraged to relocate. Except it never did. It came back, sometimes with friends. You once suggested getting a cat. Brother Eustace didn't even look up. Cats are prideful, he said, and prone to sitting on the Gospel of John. That was the end of that. So instead you just try to be vigilant. Some scribes have developed a sixth sense for it, a kind of peripheral mouse detection system. You've caught flickers of motion out of the corner of your eye that turned out to be nothing, but you still slap the desk out of habit. And let's not forget the beetles, silverfish, book lice, carpet beetles, All creatures that think of your manuscript as a comfy bed and a 3-course meal. You've cracked open volumes older than your grandparents, only to find little trails of destruction. Nibble holes, glue loosened, letters half erased by some insatiable insect. You wonder sometimes if the insects are trying to edit, if they're divine copy editors, nibbling out the bad theology. And then there are the bats. Yes, bats. One winter, a family of them roosted in the rafters above the scriptorium. At first, no one noticed. They were quiet, respectful even. Then one night, during a late illumination session, Brother Jerome was startled by something swooping across his lamp. He swatted, missed, and managed to spill gold paint across 3 pages of Leviticus. The gold paint was made with actual gold. It cost more than your entire existence. He wasn't allowed to illuminate for 3 months after that. The bats, of course, remained. You think about that sometimes when you hear the scratching. Mice, beetles, bats. This library is less a place of silence and more of a bustling food court for the animal kingdom. You keep writing, the noise stops. For now. But the evidence is everywhere. Little chew marks at the edges of old bindings. Disappearing letters where moisture and bugs have had their fun. The occasional desiccated corpse of something small and furry that died mid-feast. And the smell, musty, mouldy, damp. You've learned to identify book rot by scent alone. Some days it's like the manuscripts are slowly composting around you. You asked once why they don't just move the library somewhere drier. Brother Eustace responded with a long stare and said, "Books do not fear the damp. Men do. You're not sure what that meant. Possibly nothing. Possibly everything. Either way, you're still cold. Still copying. Still glancing at the wall with mild paranoia. At one point, you catch Brother Matthew stuffing a piece of bread into a hole in the floor. Bribe, he mutters, eyes twitching. Keep them on that side. You nod solemnly. You understand. You once caught a mouse mid-nibble and locked eyes with it. It looked strangely unrepentant, maybe even smug. You felt something stir inside you. Admiration? Hatred? Shared suffering? You're not sure. But you haven't used that corner of the desk since. Eventually the scratching fades, replaced once more by the steady sounds of pens on parchment, the crackle of the fireless air, and the occasional sigh. You lean forward again, back into your manuscript, aware that this is what preservation really looks like. Not neat little shelves and quiet reverence, but an endless war against things that chew. Still, you write. Because if you don't, someone else might, and they might not know how to keep the mice at bay. It's winter now, officially. You know this, not because anyone declared it, or because the snow has piled up dramatically outside the abbey walls, but because your ink froze solid this morning. Not just thick, not just sludgy, frozen, like jam left in a crypt. You tapped the bottle and got nothing. You breathed on it, held it close to your chest, prayed a little, but in the end you had to warm it beside a sputtering lamp until it loosened enough to stir. It's a good reminder. In the scriptorium, you don't control the seasons. The seasons control you. Everything slows down in winter. Not time. You're still expected to copy at your usual pace. But your body, your joints, your thought process, even your breath seems to take longer on the way in, like it's reluctant to meet the chill inside your lungs. This is the kind of cold that feels personal. It's not just physical. It feels like an insult. You sit hunched over a desk, wearing the same robe you wore in spring, same sandals, same hood, but now your fingers ache before you even touch the quill. You blow on them, rub them together, tuck them into your sleeves. Doesn't help. Brother Jerome tried wearing 2 pairs of socks last year. Brother Eustace said it showed a lack of spiritual fortitude. Jerome got chilblains and a passive-aggressive note pinned to his door in Latin. You look down at your hand. The knuckles are red, raw. You try flexing them. They creak like floorboards in an old attic. You dip your quill. The ink's warm enough now, but barely. It sticks to the nib like molasses. You give the bottle a small shake and say softly, "Please," before beginning the next line. Historians still argue whether monasteries truly had no heating in their workspaces, or if some provided hidden heat sources, braziers, underfloor vents, or cloister fireplaces. The records are vague, probably because no one wanted to admit they were cold. It was considered a test of virtue, a kind of sanctified suffering. But you're not feeling virtuous right now. You're feeling like your toes are about to mutiny. You glance at Brother Matthew. His left hand is tucked under his robe, his right scrawling a wobbly sentence that's already crooked by the second word. Brother Anselm has given up entirely and is standing next to the window, trying to warm himself in the pathetic beam of sunlight slanting through. It looks more like a ghost's flashlight than a warming glow. And then there's you, still writing, still cold, still pretending your breath isn't misting up the edge of your parchment. There's ice on the inside of the window again. Not snow, ice. It forms strange curling shapes, like vines or sigils, traced across the glass by the breath of a building that refuses to be warm. You once asked Brother Gregor, the herbalist, if he could make a warming salve. He gave you something that smelled like onions and made your fingers tingle. You used it once, then spent a full day copying with the taste of garlic, inexplicably stuck in your throat. You keep your quill moving. Slowly, carefully. Your body doesn't want to cooperate. You're stiff now, from shoulders to wrists to knees. Your legs have fallen asleep again. Not the funny kind of asleep, the kind where you worry they might never wake up. You shift on your stool. A mistake. The sudden jolt of movement causes your back to spasm like an offended cat. You sit still again and stare at the next sentence, et verbum caro factum est. And the word was made flesh. You squint, your hand trembles, you write. You wonder briefly if your bones will feel this in the afterlife. Will the saints welcome you, or will they tell you, "Sorry, we didn't recognize your handwriting. It got a bit shaky there at the end." A breeze sneaks in from under the door, cold enough to sting. You want to block it with something, but you have nothing to spare. No extra cloth, no extra energy. You're one draft away from just stuffing a page of Leviticus into the crack and calling it insulation. One winter, Brother Bernard actually did that. Tore out a page from a water-damaged psalter and used it as a foot wrap. He wasn't allowed to write again for months. But his toes were fine. You think about Bernard a lot lately. Brother Eustace walks past, his robe making that telltale whiff of cold fabric. He stops near your desk, looks at your parchment. You wait, breath held. He nods once, then walks on. You exhale. Tiny ice crystals form on the edge of your quill. Outside you hear the wind whistle across the stone walls, a sound like ghosts laughing. You're not even halfway through the chapter. Still, you write. You write because there are only two choices in winter. Write or freeze. Sometimes both. You're not sure when the scriptorium stopped being a workspace and started feeling more like a trap. At first, it was subtle. Just the low ceiling pressing in a little too much, the benches seeming closer together than before, the hiss of the oil lamp growing louder in your ears, until you could swear it was whispering things in Latin. But then you realized it's not just the cold or the chains or even the mice, it's the rules. You are surrounded by rules. Some spoken, most not. Rules about posture, rules about silence, rules about how many letters can touch a line, rules about breathing in Brother Eustace's presence, rules about where your candle should sit so that it casts just enough light on your manuscript, but not so much that it seems decadent. You can't even yawn without judgment. Not because anyone says anything, but because the moment your jaw so much as suggests a stretch, every other monk in the room turns into a marble bust of quiet disapproval. Brother Matthew once sneezed and was assigned extra prayer duty for auditory disruption. The silence in the scriptorium is not peaceful. It's oppressive, dense, a kind of sacred vacuum where sound goes to die. The scraping of your quill is the loudest noise you're allowed to make, and even that can earn you a look if it's too scratchy. Historians still debate how strict these environments really were. Some argue that not all monasteries enforce total silence. Others suggest the quiet was less about rules and more about mutual exhaustion. After all, who has the energy to talk when you've been bent over a desk for 10 hours, freezing from the inside out? But here, in your particular order, silence is a kind of spiritual offering. You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't hum. You definitely don't whistle. One novice tried that last year, some kind of nervous tic. He's gone now. No one talks about where. Possibly reassigned, possibly buried beneath the floor with a note that says tempo too jaunty. And it's not just the talking. You aren't allowed to look bored. Your expression must remain serenely focused, which is hard to maintain when you've just drawn the same illuminated capital letter 12 times and your wrist feels like it's filled with pebbles. You can't lean too far over your desk. You can't fidget. You can't hum, cough too often, or use your left hand in an unseemly fashion. You still don't know what that means. Brother Jerome once adjusted his posture mid-copy and groaned. Brother Eustace stopped what he was doing, stood, walked all the way over, and placed a hand on Jerome's shoulder without a word. Then he walked back. That was it. No yelling, no punishment. Just a single, silent gesture that said, "We do not groan here. You've considered writing faster. Maybe speeding up a little just to get to the end of your assigned folio. But you know better. Speed shows impatience. Impatience suggests pride. And pride, as everyone here loves to remind you, was Lucifer's favourite sin. So you copy at a holy pace. Deliberate, measured, not too fast, not too slow. And the space itself conspires against you. The benches are deliberately narrow so you can't slouch. The desks tilt slightly forward, so if you fall asleep, you slide off and wake up before breaking something. The lamps are positioned to cast just enough light to keep you awake, but not enough to see clearly. And you can't leave early. You can't leave at all unless you've been granted permission by the beadle, who patrols the room like a prison guard with a sanctified clipboard. The beadle doesn't speak either. He just appears, always where you don't want him. You'll be halfway through a tricky line, something with 5 capital letters in a row and a marginal note about goats, and suddenly his shadow stretches across your parchment like divine wrath. You flinch. You correct your quill angle. He nods, then vanishes. You once theorized he doesn't walk at all, just materializes like guilt. There's a rule about marginal notes too. Technically, you're allowed to annotate, but only in designated areas and only if it's edifying. The problem is, no one can agree on what counts as edifying. You wrote very confusing passage next to a bit in job once, and were told you were questioning divine clarity. Now you just write C.F. Augustine next to anything you don't understand. No one questions Augustine. Brother Matthew once wrote, "Why?" in a margin, just one word, and he was taken aside for spiritual realignment. He came back 2 days later looking haunted and using fewer vowels. You remember one time you laughed, just once. Brother Anselm had accidentally copied Holy Ghost as Holy Goat, and you couldn't help it. It wasn't even a big laugh, just a puff of air. But the entire room paused, not in anger, just disappointment. You were reassigned to sorting broken quills for a week. That was the punishment. Boredom deeper than boredom. You begged to return to copying by day 3, and yet, despite the quiet, the tension, the hovering presence of the beadle, you stay. You stay because this is the work. This is where the words live. And no matter how many rules hang over your head, like icicles waiting to fall, you know that when your hand moves correctly, when the lines align, when the ink flows smoothly, there is a moment, brief but real, where it feels like grace, but just as you feel it, you cough. 3 desks turn toward you. Brother Eustace lifts his eyes. You bow your head. You will cough internally from now on. You try not to flinch when the beadle's staff taps the floor behind you. It's not even a loud sound, just a soft talk of wood on stone, but in this holy hush it might as well be thunder. You glance down at your work, hoping desperately that your last line is straight, your ink even, your margins obedient. Because if not, well, the beadle will let you know. He doesn't shout. He doesn't even speak most days. He just appears. With the slow, deliberate pace of a man who knows fear travels faster than footsteps. Beadles were, and in your case still are, the monastic enforcers of order. Not violent, not cruel, just immovable. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of a library bouncer who also happens to believe he's enforcing God's will. Historians aren't fully in agreement on how common beadles were across monastic Europe. Some argue they were more symbolic figures, assistants to abbots and priors. Others insist they played a very real and intimidating role in scriptoria, especially in more isolated or prestige-driven abbeys. You personally vote for the latter, because you have met Brother Amalaric. He's the beadle here. He walks like a man who thinks time should apologize to him. Tall, silent, permanently grim, and always clutching that staff, not for walking, but as a physical punctuation mark. When he taps it, you correct whatever you're doing. Whether or not it was technically wrong, he is silence, weaponized, and he sees everything. You once tried to shift your bench to get a better angle on the window light. You didn't realize it screeched slightly on the stone. 3 seconds later, tock, the staff. You never moved that bench again. Brother Matthew, who at this point is basically your emotional support monk, once tried to smile during a particularly well-executed paragraph. The staff tapped once. Matthew didn't smile again for a week. No one knows where Amalaric sleeps. Some believe he simply vanishes into the stone like a gargoyle at dusk. Others think he has a tiny nest behind the archives, lined with scrolls and regret. You once caught a glimpse of him reading. Just reading. No staff, no glowering. He looked almost human. It lasted 5 seconds. Then he looked up, and you remembered your place. And yet, oddly, there is a kind of safety in his presence. He keeps the order, he protects the silence. And he has, on more than one occasion, caught someone stealing a manuscript. Yes, that happens. Books, after all, are priceless, not in the poetic sense, but the literal one. A single manuscript could take months or years to copy. Some were encrusted with gems. Others were one-of-a-kind treatises or theological arguments that couldn't be replaced. So monks, or visiting scholars, who got greedy, sometimes tried to smuggle one out. One nobleman, you heard, tried to hollow out a saddlebag and walk out with an entire hymnal. The beadle found him before he made it to the gate. The hymnal was recovered. The nobleman had to donate a vineyard to avoid excommunication. Amalaric never blinks. You've never seen him blink. He scans the room constantly, as if waiting for someone to smudge a marginal note or drop a quill with too much enthusiasm. One afternoon, during winter, a new novice coughed into his sleeve twice. Amalaric appeared behind him with a spoonful of mustard seed tonic and a look that said, "Drink this, and then reconsider your entire life." The novice drank. The coughing stopped, possibly forever. You sometimes wonder what the beadle thinks of all this, if he feels pride in the stillness he keeps, or if he's simply internalized the rules so deeply that enforcing them is his spiritual practice. Does he remember what it's like to just read a book? Not guard one, not shush someone, just sit and read? Probably not. You consider sometimes that the beadle might be the only one colder than you, not because he feels less, but because he's chosen to be the ice at the heart of this whole frozen machine. But then again, he has warm gloves. You've seen them. Soft leather, lined in wool. He wears them when lighting lamps or checking locks. It feels unfair. His hands look warm. Yours look like pickled radishes. One time, just once, you saw Brother Eustace smile at something the beadle said. Just a slight curl of the lips. It shook you. You once tried to ask Amalaric a question. Just one. About a missing folio. He looked at you for a full 5 seconds, then simply walked away. You took that as permission to figure it out yourself. And you did. Eventually. Still, despite his looming presence, Amalaric is not cruel. You've seen him help a scribe who fell asleep and slumped sideways. He caught the monk's head before it hit the desk. He even refilled a lamp once when Brother Jerome's hands were too stiff to twist the cap. So yes, he's stern. He's spooky. He's basically the final boss of quiet. But he's also necessary. Without him, the silence would collapse. The rhythm would break. And honestly, you don't trust Brother Matthew not to start humming again. So, you glance up. You see Amalaric pacing the room. His staff taps once. Somewhere behind you, someone straightens up, and the quills keep scratching. You glance to your left, then to your right, then down at the margin of your manuscript. It's there. You shouldn't have written it, but you did. Just 3 words, barely a whisper of ink, nestled discreetly under the main body of text in a space where no one usually looks. This makes no sense. It was about the passage you were copying, some long, tangled bit of patristic theology that looped back on itself more than a monastery hallway. You reached the end and realized it contradicted the beginning. So you wrote a comment, in Latin of course, hoc non convenit, just enough snark to keep your soul from evaporating. But now you regret it, because someone might see. Marginalia, those little scribbled notes in the edges of manuscripts, are a tradition older than most abbeys. Some are helpful, some are jokes, some are furious rants. But in your scriptorium, they're considered risky. You were supposed to leave the page pure. Historians delight in marginalia. They find doodles of knights fighting snails, cats licking their butts, or frustrated scribes venting about bad lighting or bad Latin. These notes offer a glimpse into the human behind the text, but in your current reality, they can also land you in trouble. Brother Anselm once wrote a full limerick about St. Jerome in the corner of a damaged hymnal. He was sentenced to silence for a month, not the peaceful kind, the punishment kind, where even his prayers had to be internal. You've never seen a man age so quickly. Your note isn't a limerick, thank heavens, just a tiny, passive-aggressive aside. Maybe you can scrape it off later. But still, you feel watched. You feel the shadow of the beadle lurking even where he isn't. You feel the weight of 1,000 invisible rules pressing down on that one little comment. Of course, not all marginalia are complaints. Some scribes use the space to cite related passages, pose rhetorical questions, or explain obscure references. You've done that too, carefully, neatly in red ink, approved marginalia, edifying marginalia, the kind that wins nods from Brother Eustace. But then there are the other kinds, desperate notes. Cold today. Again. I miss plums. If anyone finds this, I was here. These are the whispers that slip out when your spirit cracks just slightly from the weight of repetition, silence, and ink. The margin becomes your confessional, your diary, your escape route. You once saw a doodle of a monk hanging upside down from a chandelier. It was perfect, complete with a tiny quill in the monk's hand and an expression of either joy or madness. It was hidden inside the initial Q on page 90 of A History of Saxon Kings. You showed it to Brother Matthew and he laughed so hard he cried. Then he apologised to God and the beadle, but the joy remained. You've thought about drawing something yourself. Maybe a snail, maybe a dragon, maybe a snail fighting a dragon. But you haven't yet. You don't want to push your luck, not after the note. Still, the urge is strong. The margin is so tempting. A blank space just begging for a joke, a sigh, a quiet rebellion. You wonder what future readers will think of your note. Will they chuckle, nod in agreement? Will they even notice? Or will they see only the main text, the neat rows of letters, the sacred order, and miss the tiny voice calling from the edge? You resume copying. Carefully, correctly, you push the margin out of your mind. But now you're thinking of all the other scribes before you, the ones who left secrets in the sides of pages, the ones who pressed their humanity into the spaces between the words. You remember hearing about a monk in Wales who, during a storm, wrote in the margin, "The wind is so loud I can barely write. Lord, have mercy." You loved that line. It made the scribe feel real. You wonder if your line will do the same. Eventually, Brother Eustace approaches. You hold your breath. He peers at your page. His finger hovers, then lands just above your note. You stare at his face. He reads it, pauses, then exhales through his nose in a sound you can't quite interpret. He walks away. No reprimand, no staff tap, just nothing. You breathe again. Brother Matthew leans slightly in your direction and mouths, "What did you do?" You shake your head. You'll tell him later. For now, you keep writing, a little slower, a little lighter, as if the margin gave you just enough space to exhale. The bell tolls again, and you don't even flinch. By now it's become part of your bloodstream, a slow, echoing thud that lets you know the day is bleeding away and the night is preparing to creep in, cold and unforgiving. You stretch your fingers, not because it helps, but because it's the only moment you can take without being silently judged. Across the scriptorium, Brother Isidore is hunched over a different kind of work. You can just make out the faint shimmer of gold leaf catching the last flicker of light. The illuminators are at it again. You both work on manuscripts, sure, but they do magic. While you copy letter after letter in cramped monochrome lines, they spend days decorating just one capital, one glorious, shimmering, painfully delicate capital letter that shines like treasure. You admire it. You also hate it a little. Illumination in theory is a sacred art. It's the visual echo of the word, but in practice, it's a medieval form of self-torture involving rabbit skin glue, powdered gemstones, and squirrel hair brushes so fine they make your quill look like a club. Brother Isidore dips his tiny brush into a dish of blue so vibrant it looks unnatural. Lapis lazuli, most likely. Imported all the way from Afghanistan, ground by hand, and mixed with water, egg whites, or honey, depending on the level of pain the illuminator desires. 1 gram of it costs more than a cow. A whole page of that stuff. That's an illuminated miracle, and that's just the blue. For reds, they use vermilion. Basically, powdered mercury. Lovely to look at. Possibly fatal. For greens, copper acetate, which turns your fingernails a disturbing colour if you're not careful. And for gold, they use real gold. Not metaphorically. Real gold leaf, pressed thinner than a thought, applied with breath and prayers. You once watched an illuminator sneeze mid-application. It was like a Renaissance glitter bomb. Historians love to marvel at illuminated manuscripts today. They're treasured museum pieces, studied for their symbolism and technical perfection. But historians weren't there the night Brother Elias dropped his brush in his egg gold mix and screamed so loudly the beadle came in to reassign him to prayer duty. Illumination isn't just an art, it's an ordeal. Brother Isidore is working on a bestiary, a compendium of animals, both real and absurd. He's painting a lion that looks more like a disapproving cow, surrounded by vines that seem intent on strangling each other. You don't tell him this. He's already hunched at an angle that would give a chiropractor nightmares, and his eyes are so close to the page, you're worried he might become part of the manuscript. You remember the time Brother Eustace asked an illuminator to redo an entire border. because one cherub had a lazy eye. The illuminator didn't say anything. He just walked into the courtyard and lay face down in the grass for an hour. And then there's the timeline. While you can crank out a few folios a week if your hand doesn't betray you, the illuminators might finish 1 page per week. Maybe. And that's if the humidity cooperates and the gold doesn't wrinkle and the cat doesn't walk across the drying paint. Yes, that happened. You've seen the paw prints. You're not allowed to illuminate. Not yet. Your lettering is reliable, according to Brother Eustace, which is both a compliment and an eternal sentence. But sometimes, when no one's looking, you trace swirls in the corner of your practice pages, little flourishes, hints of dragons, a leaf or two. You hide them later, of course, but still, they exist. You once dared to ask Brother Isidore what kept him going. He paused mid-line and said, "There's nothing holier than a page that glows in the dark." Then he returned to his work. You think about that a lot, because there's something transcendent about these pages. Not just the content, but the form. The fact that someone in the middle of a century with no plumbing and very little cheese sat down and said, "Yes, this marginal rabbit must wear shoes," and did it with precision, with reverence, with a brush the width of a spider's leg. You sometimes dream in pigments now, in gold dots and red curls and impossible blues, and though you're not an illuminator, you feel tethered to them, two halves of the same endless task. You copy, they glorify. Together you make something that might outlast kingdoms. Brother Isidore shifts, his back cracks audibly. He sighs, and still, he paints. Outside, the light fades to the colour of pewter. Inside, your lamp sputters. You dip your quill. He dips his brush. 2 scribes. 1 cold, holy calling. You don't notice the smell until it's too late. One moment you're hunched over a freshly copied folio of Augustine's Confessions, content in the numb ache of your wrists. The next, a damp, fungal scent slithers up your nostrils. Half mildew, half something worse. You gag softly. Ah, the mould has returned. It always does this time of year, when the rain soaks the monastery walls and the cold air can't quite dry anything. The scriptorium, for all its lofty holiness, is still just a box of stone with poor ventilation and a deep-set fear of open windows. And where there's moisture, there's mould. Your manuscript is safe, so far. But others haven't been so lucky. You remember the time Brother Jerome opened a volume of Gregory's sermons and found entire paragraphs blooming with little green fuzz like holy moss. He cried, "You all did." Historians still debate how medieval libraries dealt with mould. Some think the manuscripts were aired regularly. Others argue they were simply scrubbed, or worse, discarded when decay got too advanced. You've seen it up close, though. There's no simple solution. Mould is sneaky. It starts as a faint spot, barely visible, and before you know it, the psalms smell like old shoes. And it's not just the smell. The bindings warp, the pages go soft, the ink bleeds, words disappear into damp smudges like language being swallowed alive. It's a special kind of heartbreak, watching months or years of divine transcription melt into illegibility because someone left a window unlatched during a thunderstorm. Brother Matthew once tried to save a rotting homily with vinegar and sunlight. It worked. Partially. The smell vanished, but so did half the margins. The surviving text now reads like a surrealist haiku. You still quote it sometimes when you're feeling rebellious. There's an argument happening now, quietly, in the far alcove. Brother Anselm insists a manuscript smells musky, not mouldy. Brother Eustace is unconvinced. He approaches slowly, lifts the folio, and sniffs like a disapproving bloodhound. He says nothing, but walks it out of the room with the solemnity of a funeral procession. You all know what that means. Exile to the dry room. Ah, yes. The dry room. A closet-sized chamber with low shelves, a brazier, and the collective hope of 5 centuries. It's where mouldy manuscripts are sent to dry out, and where some of them quietly crumble to dust. You once visited the dry room. It smelled like parchment, cloves, and despair. Brother Isidore tried to fix a page with wormholes by layering a new sheet behind it and retracing the missing letters. It almost worked, but the glue warped under the humidity and the ink bled through. The result was a page that looked like it had sweated through its own skin. You think of all the work that's been lost to moisture, entire saints' lives, maps of forgotten places, recipes for inks no one remembers how to make, all gone. Not in fire, not in war, but in the quiet rot of time. And sometimes the mould spreads through touch. You once brushed your sleeve against a damp volume and found the same green film on your cuff the next morning. You burned that robe. Brother Jerome swears he saw mould growing between the pages of a closed book. You don't know if that's true, but you still keep a piece of charcoal in your desk just in case. It's supposed to absorb moisture, or at least that's what the apothecary told you between sneezes. You wipe down your desk with a rag every morning now, not because it helps, but because it makes you feel like you're doing something, like you have some control, like the slow decay hasn't already crept into the corners of your life. But deep down, you know, mould always finds a way. It's not even the obvious kind. It's insidious, subtle. A patch in the corner of a cover, a faint shadow across the lower margin, a change in the way the page smells when you turn it. It's memory, unravelling. You hear Brother Eustace returning now, his sandals scuffing the floor. He sets down the mouldy manuscript on the far bench and nods to Brother Matthew. Another restoration attempt begins. You watch quietly as he opens it, gently as a newborn, and fans the pages with careful hands. He sighs. You sigh with him. Because sometimes even saints can't stop rot. And so you write faster. Quietly, reverently, trying to capture the words before the walls grow too damp, before the ink fades, before time breathes its green breath across your page. You don't fear death. You fear mildew. You've spent the better part of your day carefully copying a commentary on the Book of Psalms, and now, miraculously, you're done with the folio. You stretch, gently, carefully, quietly. One wrong move and Brother Eustace will assume you've committed some sort of theological crime against posture. You glance over at the completed page with a small private feeling of victory. The margins are clean, the letters are even. The ink didn't smudge, and your quill didn't break halfway through Psalm 83 like it did yesterday. But then you smell it, that faint sour scent, almost like wax that's gone rancid or old wool after rain. And it's not coming from your own manuscript. You turn your head just slightly and squint at the shelf in the corner. Ah, the old bindings. You know the ones. Every scriptorium has a few of them. Books no one touches unless they have to. Thick, ancient things wrapped in crumbling leather and cracked wood, their spines warped, their clasps rusted shut like they've been trying to suffocate themselves for years. They are survivors of centuries, but not good survivors. They're fragile, stained, and vaguely sinister in how they seem to watch you. One of them actually hisses when opened. You're fairly sure that's the spine cracking, but you also wouldn't rule out a curse. Bindings in the medieval world aren't just paper and glue. They're elaborate constructions. Wood boards, animal skin covers, metal clasps, bone pegs, linen threads, wax seals. Each one a Frankenstein's monster of craftsmanship, made from more creatures than a small village could count. Historians still debate whether early binding methods were more functional or symbolic. Some say the decorated boards were meant to reflect the beauty of the words inside. Others argue they were just the best materials available. You, however, think the binding was meant to survive apocalypse. You reach over and touch the edge of one of the old volumes. The cover is dry and warped like tree bark. The leather flakes at your touch. It's likely sheepskin, or worse, calf skin, the kind taken very young for maximum pliability. They called it limp vellum. You call it creepy. These books are heavy, not just physically but spiritually. When you carry one, it feels like it should come with a warning label. Caution contains too much knowledge. Lift with knees. Some of the bindings still have clasps, thick metal teeth that lock the book shut like a tiny treasure chest. The idea was to protect the parchment from warping, especially in the damp, but half of them are rusted shut now. Others have been snapped off entirely, leaving jagged stubs that could absolutely double as medieval self-defense weapons. You once cut your finger on one and bled on the cover. Brother Eustace was not amused. He said, "The word of God does not require additional red ink. You cleaned it thoroughly. You still have the scar." The pages inside these old bindings are stiff, yellowed, and full of mysteries. Some are written in dead dialects. Others contain diagrams of stars, herbs, or saints, with oddly muscular calves. Occasionally, a book is so old no one knows where it came from, who copied it, or why it's shelved under miscellanea next to a tract on beekeeping and a volume titled simply On Screaming. You flip one open now, cautiously. The spine groans. The pages smell like dried mushrooms and candle soot. There's a pressed flower in the margin of page 48, its petals long since browned to parchment. Someone before you must have thought it sacred, or at least decorative. Then you notice the note, scrawled in the bottom corner in a shaky, spidery hand. "I hope this book is never opened again." You pause, then gently, very gently, close the cover. Brother Matthew once told you about a manuscript he found bound with catgut. Not the usual string, but actual catgut. "The book meowed when you opened it," he said. Probably a joke, hopefully a joke. Still, you eye the bindings now with a healthy mix of reverence and superstition. Some of them are wrapped in fabric, silk if you're lucky, wool if you're not. The silk ones shimmer even in the gloom. They're used for psalters and gospels, important books, royal books, the kind you're not allowed to touch without a cloth and 3 Hail Marys. You dream sometimes of binding your own book, finishing a whole manuscript, not just copying, but decorating, gilding, and binding it with soft leather and perfect clasps. It would feel like giving birth to a small, word-filled dragon. But that's a dream. Right now, you're just trying not to sneeze on the brittle cover of On the Errors of the Albigensians. You gently reshelve the volume, making sure its chain settles quietly. You don't want it clanking and drawing attention. Behind you, Brother Isidore whispers, "Careful." That one bites. You turn. He's already back to painting gold halos, grinning faintly. The bindings creak again as the shelf settles. You sit back at your desk, quill in hand, and begin your next folio. But a corner of your eye keeps drifting to the shelf. Not out of fear, out of respect. Because you know, those books have survived more winters than you'll ever see, and they're still standing. You reach for the next manuscript in your queue, and your stomach sinks a little when you see the title scrawled across the top. De Urbis et Incantationibus, on herbs and spells. Oh no, you know this one. Everyone does. It's infamous. This is what happens when the cataloguing system is more hope than method. You end up with a treatise on medicinal plants shelved next to an exorcism manual, and a bestiary that includes a creature called the Barking Horse of Damascus. Welcome to cataloguing in the medieval monastery, where taxonomy is a theological suggestion. And if you, poor scribe, wish to find a specific book, you pray. Cataloguing is supposed to be logical, but in reality it's chaos dressed in a robe. Most monasteries, including yours, don't have a formalized index system. There's no Dewey Decimal here. There's just Brother Egidius, who swears he knows where everything is, and then points vaguely at a shelf labelled Various. Historians still debate how organized medieval libraries really were. Some evidence points to careful inventories and shelf lists, early catalogues written in cramped Latin, often on scraps of parchment nailed to doors. Others suggest things were stored based on whim, reputation, or who last touched it. Here, it's mostly the latter. Books are sorted by broad themes: theology, saints, bad ideas, things that smell, and books that have bitten someone. The last shelf contains De Herbis et Incantationibus, which has allegedly caused 2 nosebleeds and 1 fainting spell. You open it cautiously. There's a pressed thistle in the gutter between pages. You leave it alone. The first entry is about wild garlic and its properties against demons. The second is about how to boil nettles and recite Psalm 6 to remove kidney stones. The handwriting is old, older than most of the walls in the abbey, and the Latin experimental. You make a mental note to ask Brother Matthew if oculus serpentinus is a real ingredient or just someone having a very bad day with a green beetle. The margins are covered with commentary, not from one monk, but several. Different hands, different centuries. One note simply reads, "Do not test this at home." You believe them. Cataloguing these kinds of texts used to be someone's job. Once upon a time, Brother Ulfric, the librarian before Eustace, attempted a full index. He got through the first 3 shelves, then vanished. Some say he transferred to a warm abbey. Others say he was absorbed into the bindings. You once found his name in the corner of a page of On the Virtues of Wine. Coincidence? Even Brother Eustace, for all his sharpness, doesn't know exactly how many books you have. He keeps an inventory written on several long strips of parchment that he rolls up and ties with human hair. Whose hair? No one asks. When someone misplaces a manuscript, the entire scriptorium is turned upside down. Shelves are pulled, desks are emptied, and eventually someone finds it tucked behind a hymnal or being used to prop up a wobbly lamp. You once saw a book of hours labelled Codex 47b-ish. That dash-ish says everything. Brother Anselm swears there's a secret tunnel under the library where forbidden manuscripts are hidden, texts deemed too dangerous or too French. He claims to have seen one that screamed when opened. You think he might have just dropped it on his foot. Still, when you need to find a book, the protocol is this. 1. Ask Brother Egidius. 2. Regret asking Brother Egidius. 3. Search every shelf labelled Other. 4. Pray. 5. Eventually, find it in the kitchen for no reason. The only reliable marker is the chain. If the book is still attached, at least you know it hasn't wandered. Much! Of course, sometimes the chain isn't enough. One manuscript slipped its bracket and fell behind a cabinet last year. It was missing for months. When it was recovered, it had grown mould, lost a chapter, and gained a note in the back that read, "Don't put me there again." You try to do your part. After copying, you write the book's title neatly on the tag, tie it to the end of the chain and make sure the shelf mark is accurate. You even use red ink for clarity. But you know deep down it won't help, because no matter how carefully you label it, the next monk looking for this book will squint at the tag, sigh, and wander off muttering, "I think it's in the Psalms section," which it never is. You flip another page. A diagram of herbs shaped like a lizard grins at you. You shake your head and return to copying, knowing full well that once you're done, this manuscript will disappear into the swirling vortex of the monastery's system. And someday, someone else will open it and wonder why it smells like vinegar and panic. You're nearly done with your copying for the day, which means it's time for the most dangerous phase of all, returning the manuscript to the shelf without causing a theological incident. You check the folio one last time. Everything looks right. The margins are clean. The quill didn't betray you. No rogue hairs, no oil smudges from your fingers, and most importantly, you didn't spill your soup on it, like Brother Theobald did last Lent. To this day, the psalter he ruined still smells faintly of turnips and shame. You rise slowly. Your knees crack so loudly Brother Matthew flinches. You lift the book carefully, 2 hands supporting the spine, like it's an elderly noble who's just informed you they're feeling delicate. You walk toward the shelf and immediately realize there's a problem. Your manuscript's chain is tangled, not just looped. Tangled, twisted in that special way only medieval librarianship can produce, wrapped once around the desk leg, then through the handle of the inkpot, and somehow knotted to a different book entirely. A book you haven't seen in 3 months, a book labelled "Do Not Touch." You take a breath. Then you do what every medieval scribe does in a moment of stress. You sigh deeply and pretend this is someone else's problem. Historians might debate many things, but there is no doubt that chains in a chained library were not designed with convenience in mind. Each book is fastened by a thick iron chain, nailed to the cover or spine, which is itself secured to a horizontal bar above the desk or along the shelf. The chain is supposed to allow you to read without removing the book, but only barely. You get maybe 18 inches of slack, and that's if the monk who attached it wasn't having a bad day. They often were. You try untangling it gently, aware that Brother Eustace's hearing is fine-tuned to the specific sound of chain-on-chain violence. The chain groans. You wince. You ease it through the handle of the inkpot, and for a fleeting moment, you feel victorious. Then the inkpot tips. In slow motion you lunge, not for the pot, no, that's gone, but for the manuscript. You catch it. The pot shatters on the floor behind you. Every monk in the room freezes. Quills hover mid-air. Breathing stops, and then, tock, the beadle's staff. Of course, you turn slowly, manuscript still in your hands like an apology carved in leather. Brother Amalaric is already approaching, his eyes as calm and unreadable as the Dead Sea Scrolls. He surveys the mess. The ink is spreading like a plague, an inky tide of regret and humiliation. The pot miraculously missed every other manuscript. Still, it's everywhere. Your sandals are already stained. He looks at you, then at the chain, then back at you. Silence. Finally, he nods once, slowly. Not forgiveness, not rage, just the acknowledgement of inevitability. Then he turns and vanishes into the hallway. Brother Matthew lets out a breath he's clearly been holding since 1327. You mop up the ink with the bottom edge of your robe. It's already ruined. Might as well. Later, when the room has settled back into its usual silence, you manage to free the chain, coil it carefully, and return the book to its shelf. You double-check the label, triple-check the shelf mark, and then, with all the reverence of a burial rite, slide it into place. That's when you notice the gap. A missing book. One that was there yesterday. You peer closer. It's the copy of Inquiries into the Nature of Angels. Gone. You whisper to Brother Matthew. He nods grimly. Last seen during Vespers. Brother Anselm was reading it. Did he return it? No one knows. You both stare at the empty space like it's a hole in the wall of the world. Because when a book goes missing, it isn't just an inconvenience. It's an event. Everyone becomes a suspect. Brother Eustace once made the entire monastery fast for a day because a copy of Chrysostom's homilies was misplaced for 12 hours. It was later found behind a lectern holding up a tilted candlestick. Books vanish in monasteries more often than they should. Maybe it's the chaos of the cataloguing. Maybe it's mischief. Or maybe the books just don't want to be read. You've seen it happen. Open a book, copy a few pages, look away for a second, and it's on a different shelf entirely. You suspect Brother Egidius has trained them. Still, when a book vanishes, someone has to answer for it. You check your own shelf once more, everything accounted for. You pat the bindings like old friends. Thank them. Apologize to them. Brother Matthew leans in. What if the books rearrange themselves? You pause, then nod slowly. Makes as much sense as anything else. After all, in a world of tangled chains, cursed bindings, and ink that freezes solid, sentient books don't even crack the top 10 weirdest things. You return to your desk. The pot is gone. So is the stain. Someone must have cleaned it while you were shelving. You blink. There's a new pot of ink on your desk. Full. You don't ask questions, you just dip your quill. and write. You rub your eyes with the edge of your sleeve, even though you know the wool is scratchy and probably harbouring a bit of mould from last week's rains. Doesn't matter. You've just spent the last hour deciphering what may be the most frustrating text ever penned. A legal document written in Latin, glossed in Greek, then edited by a scribe, who apparently thought punctuation was a form of heresy. You reach the end of the line, realise you skipped a word 3 sentences back, and audibly whimper. This is the moment when you remember, again, that every scribe was expected to learn Latin. Twice. First you had to learn Church Latin, which was the pristine, grammar-heavy version, spoken and sung during services. Then you had to deal with the rest, the mess of regional variants, squashed abbreviations, and cryptic medieval shorthand that no one warned you about. You first realised something was wrong the day you opened a manuscript and found an entire line that read, Dies dans statque ut noescas qd est sp. Yes, that's a sentence, kind of. Spoken aloud, it's Dominus Dominus diceret ut non sanctus quod est spiritus. Translated, the Lord said that it is not the Holy Spirit, or something like that. Scholars still argue whether the non was a scribal error or the precursor to a church schism. You don't care. You just want to know what the scribes were thinking. Welcome to the hellscape of medieval abbreviation. Historians debate how widespread and standardized these Latin abbreviations were. Some believe they followed a set of rules, like today's shorthand. Others point out that most monks invented their own as they went along, which means each manuscript is a linguistic fingerprint, or, as you like to call it, a trap. You've spent hours looking up single symbols, little curls and squiggles that mean things like and also, or unless the bishop disagrees under duress. You once copied an entire passage assuming a tilde meant amen, only to learn it meant but, however. 2 very different vibes, and don't even start on the handwriting. You're familiar with half a dozen scripts now. Carolingian minuscule, which is elegant and blessedly readable. Gothic textura, which looks like a bird walked across the page in steel shoes. Insular script from the British Isles, which has the gall to make every S look like an R, and every R look like a confused Z. The manuscript in front of you is written in what you think is Beneventan script. Or maybe it's early Visigothic. Or maybe the scribe was just having a bad week and forgot how letters work. Brother Matthew says deciphering these texts is like being in a long-distance relationship with Latin. You love it, but you never quite understand what it's trying to say. You once spent an afternoon trying to decode a marginal note that turned out to be a shopping list. You found the Latin words for onions, barley, and thread. The scribe who wrote it also added a small drawing of what you think is a duck in a hat. At least it broke the monotony. Your Latin teacher in the novitiate once told you that to master a language, you must think in it. That's laughable. You barely think with it. Most days your brain flips through conjugation charts like a monk flipping through a hymn book in the wrong key, and yet somehow the words keep flowing. You pause now, rereading what you've written. It's not elegant, but it's accurate. You hope. You catch yourself starting to hum a Latin hymn under your breath and quickly stop. The beadle might not appreciate Gregorian humming, even if it's in tune. You glance at Brother Anselm, who's translating a Greek text into Latin, occasionally stopping to sketch tiny angry faces in the margins. You know he's reached a difficult passage when the faces start frowning. You look again at the next page. There it is, another wall of abbreviations, curling letters, and ink so faded it may as well be the ghost of Latin. You sigh, stretch your hand, dip your quill, and keep writing, because in this cold little corner of the world, language is your hammer, manuscripts are your stones, and this whole abbey, this fortress of frozen breath and fluttering parchment, is being held together by tired scribes like you, who don't entirely understand the sentence but copy it anyway, with hope, and probably several mistakes. You look up from your page as the door creaks open, sending in a blast of damp air and a flurry of cloaks. The door's been stiff all season, and every time it opens, the cold rushes in like an unwanted guest with opinions. This time, it's not a monk. It's a visitor. You groan internally. Visitors are the worst. They are, without fail, either unbearably curious, dangerously careless, or somehow both. The ones who can read act like the manuscripts are their personal playground. The ones who can't just nod thoughtfully and spill wine on the margins. This one is a nobleman, judging by the embroidered hem of his cloak and the polished look of someone who has never held a quill for more than 30 seconds. You and Brother Matthew exchange glances. It's going to be one of those days. Visitors in medieval libraries are rare, but not unheard of. Monasteries often lent books to bishops, scholars, and royals, or at least allowed them supervised access. Some came seeking knowledge, others came looking for a specific treatise, and a few just wanted to seem learned in front of their courtiers. Historians still debate how many lay people had regular access to monastic libraries. Some argue that educated nobles were frequent patrons. Others insist that libraries were largely closed systems, sacred spaces of scholarly isolation. You lean toward the latter, mostly because you've spent enough time picking breadcrumbs out of the Psalms to know what happens when someone without training gets too close to a manuscript. The nobleman smiles at Brother Eustace and gestures to the nearest chained book. Brother Eustace sighs the sigh of a man who knows this is going to end in scraped parchment and shame. The visitor seats himself delicately at a desk, as delicately as one can while wearing 6 pounds of chainmail under a velvet cloak, and immediately begins flipping through the book. Flipping, like it's a market pamphlet, like this isn't a one-of-a-kind theological text copied by a half-blind monk during a plague year. You clutch your quill in horror. Brother Matthew mimes a scream into his sleeve. The visitor leans in too close. His breath fogs the page. His ring, oh no, his ring scrapes against the parchment as he turns another folio. You wince audibly. Brother Eustace clears his throat with the subtlety of a thunderclap. The nobleman jumps. "Oh, is this vellum? Delightful texture," he says, dragging his finger across the page like he's inspecting a goose for fatness. You know this type. The ones who ask if the books are original. The ones who ask if there's a Bible with more interesting stories. The ones who try to read the Latin aloud and end up sounding like they're summoning a demon with a speech impediment. Once, a visiting merchant claimed he could improve the speed of manuscript production by hiring more monks and putting them on shifts. Brother Eustace simply walked away mid-sentence. The man was never invited back. The nobleman continues browsing, now humming. The beadle materializes out of a shadow, eyes narrowed, staff in hand. You smile ever so slightly. Brother Amalaric doesn't say anything. He just stands very close to the nobleman until the humming slows, stops, and is replaced by a polite cough. "Do you perhaps have something less dry?" the visitor asks. Brother Eustace gestures silently to a copy of the Passion of the Martyrs. It's the monastery's least cheerful manuscript. The nobleman opens it, turns one page, and closes it quickly. Oh. You go back to writing. You're working on the Confessiones again. Augustine always helps ground you when you're feeling murderous. But behind you, you hear it. A sneeze. A wet, unrepentant sneeze. The nobleman, oblivious, wipes his nose with a handkerchief and continues touching the book. You want to scream. Brother Matthew is already standing. Brother Eustace is trembling. Brother Amalaric is 2 inches from exile. You expect an explosion. But then, suddenly, the nobleman stands. "Well," he says, "very enlightening. Thank you, brothers." He bows slightly and exits, tripping over the chain of a nearby manuscript as he goes. The door slams. Silence returns. You all exhale. Brother Eustace carefully lifts the abused manuscript and carries it to the quarantine shelf. Brother Amalaric follows, just in case it needs an exorcism. Brother Matthew resumes his copying with the grim determination of a man trying to forget. You, meanwhile, stare at your manuscript. It is safe, untouched, holy. You whisper to it, "I'll never let them hurt you," because deep down you know books don't fear fire or time or the cold. They fear people. You stare at the parchment, now warm under your palm, not from any fire, of course, but from the sheer hours you've spent hunched over it. And today's text is about divine warmth. Naturally, you're copying a sermon that insists the love of God burns like an eternal flame, melting sin and warming the soul. You pause, look down at your hands, they're purple. One of your fingernails has gone numb again. Divine warmth, please. If love feels like this, God might need a new metaphor. Brother Matthew sneezes across the room, a brittle, papery sound that seems to come from deep within his robe. No one acknowledges it. You've all run out of empathy, or at least out of the physical strength to express it. You stretch your back slightly. A mistake. It sends a shockwave through your shoulders so intense you nearly shout the Lord's name in vain. You clamp your teeth shut instead. That's the monastic way. You wonder if medieval monks believed God would warm them eventually. Not metaphorically, actually. As in, step into the scriptorium one day and say, "Right then, let's fix the insulation." Historians still argue whether monastic suffering was chosen or simply tolerated. Some claim the cold was embraced as a spiritual discipline, mortifying the flesh to elevate the soul. Others say it was just what happened when you built stone buildings in northern Europe without chimneys. Either way, here you are. Hungry, tired, and copying the word incandescent with fingers like frozen twigs. You've tried layering. You wear 3 robes now. 2 wool, 1 linen. You wrap your scarf around your neck so many times it looks like you're trying to muffle a scream. Brother Eustace disapproves. He says overlayering leads to bodily sloth. Easy for him to say. His desk is next to the west wall, which leaks sunlight like a guilty conscience. You're under the north window, where no sun has ever shone. You rub your hands together. Your breath steams. Your ink bottle has begun forming a delicate ring of frost. Beautiful, in a way. Also infuriating. You light your candle. It dies. You relight it, carefully shielding the wick with your hand. A small flame flickers to life. It casts a warm glow the size of a lentil across your folio. You imagine bathing in it. You imagine crawling into the lamp like a tired bee. Once, last winter, Brother Jerome accidentally dropped his hand too close to the flame. He didn't flinch, just left it there a few seconds longer than necessary. You knew what he was doing. You've done it too. You glance at the stained glass window across the room. It depicts Christ holding a lamb, rays of golden light radiating from his head. You mutter, "Trade you spots." Brother Matthew, without looking up, says, "Blasphemy." You reply, "Truth." He nods. You return to your work. The words blur. Not from tears, just the low-grade despair of a person trying to form the Latin word for joy while your feet have gone fully extinct. You consider standing. You've forgotten what standing feels like. It might be a sin. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, it sighs through the cracks, a soft, bone-deep moan of air that slithers under your robe and makes your spine rethink its loyalty. The beadle passes by. You straighten. Even now, with icicles forming on your eyelids, you don't slouch under the beadle's gaze. Brother Isidore shifts nearby. He's illuminating a manuscript with a brush so fine it looks like he borrowed it from a spider. He's working on the Sun of Righteousness. The irony does not escape you. You whisper, "Does your sun have central heating?" He mutters, "Shh, I'm painting warmth, don't break the illusion." You return to your text. Another sentence about divine fire. Another looped S. Another finished line. Then, like a miracle, The bell tolls. You exhale, not freedom, but a pause. You set your quill down, blow gently on the ink, lean back and stretch your hands toward your candle as if it were a hearth. The warmth is laughable, but you try, because despite everything, the cold, the silence, the judgmental mice, you've done it again. You've preserved a piece of thought, a sliver of belief, a line of human hope frozen in ink, and though your nose may fall off by sunrise, at least your manuscript will live forever. You whisper softly, half prayer, half complaint, Lord, warm the soul, and maybe the scriptorium, if you're feeling generous. Brother Matthew groans nearby. You both chuckle, just a little, and for a moment, it's almost enough. You've lost track of how many pages you've copied, not because you're tired, though you are, but because somewhere along the way the numbers stopped mattering. What matters now is the rhythm, the way your quill dips and glides, the way the letters fall into line, each one tethered to the last like monks in procession. But tonight feels different. The bell rang for Compline an hour ago. The others have gone. Even Brother Eustace has retired, leaving behind the echo of his sandals and the faint scent of candle wax and wet wool. You're alone in the scriptorium now. The lamps are low, the windows are black. You should be asleep, but instead you're here, still writing. It's warmer now, oddly. Not warm exactly, but less hostile. Your candle's flame has steadied, casting long shadows across the desk. Your breath no longer fogs the air. You reach the end of your page and stop. There it is, a complete chapter, neatly penned, margins aligned, no errors. It's not beautiful, you're no illuminator, but it's precise, it's clear, and you realize it's yours. Not in content, but in craft. You've written these words, preserved them. You've dragged them through ink and cold and darkness, and now they exist in the world because of your hands. You flex your fingers. They crack audibly. They deserve the sound. You remember when you first arrived. You were younger then, softer. You thought the cold would break you, that the silence would bend your mind until it snapped, that you wouldn't last a week. But now you've become part of the building. Your skin smells faintly of parchment. Your thoughts come in Latin half the time. Your fingers know how many breaths fit in a sentence. Historians don't often write about this part, the quiet transformation. They talk about the manuscripts, the ink, the illuminations. They don't mention the nights where the only light comes from a single lamp, and the only sound is your own slow breathing. They don't mention how peaceful it can feel. You look around. The scriptorium, once so cold and cruel, seems still. Not empty, not oppressive, just still. The stones are quiet, the chains are quiet. Even the mice are miraculously silent tonight. You close your manuscript gently and rise. Your joints complain, but less than usual. You take your time walking to the shelf, returning the book with careful hands. The chain clinks softly into place. You pause just for a moment and rest your hand on the spine. Then you blow out the candle. Darkness folds around you, not terrifying but calm, like a heavy wool blanket pulled over your thoughts. And you breathe. One more page tomorrow, one more line, one more day of cold and ink and silence. But for now, you rest. So now, as the scriptorium falls silent behind you, and the last candle flickers out, you step softly into the stone corridor. The air is cool, but no longer biting. The night has settled like a robe across the abbey, thick, quiet, and absolute. Your steps are slow. You feel the echo of the day in your bones, but not in a harsh way, more like the weight of something well done. Your breath is steady. Your mind, for once, isn't cluttered with abbreviations or ink recipes or impossible marginalia. You reach your cell and sit on the edge of your straw mattress. It creaks familiarly. You pull your robe around your shoulders and close your eyes. In the stillness, you remember the manuscripts you've helped preserve, the ones filled with psalms and sermons and herbal remedies you wouldn't dare test. You think of the gold-leafed angels, the miscopied verses, the chain-bound tomes that outlived kingdoms. You smile, just a little. It's not a glamorous life, not a warm one, not even a particularly sane one, but it's yours. And in that silence, that strange medieval hush, you drift into sleep, wrapped in parchment, anchored by ink, kept warm, if only slightly, by the words you've written down.